Okay, we're on the show here. Howdy, everybody. Evolution Hour, number 90. It's been 90 weeks. Actually, a little over that because I skipped a couple of weeks during Christmas holidays and things like that. So, there is the cute little logo and the startup thing. Troubles in Paradise, the methodology of creationism, the ultimate toolkit for vaporizing anti-evolutionists. It never fails because it's a game they cannot play. So, we'll stop sharing that. I can close down that little file. And away we go. Hello, all. Still here in my little living room. Here we were talking weather earlier and all of the fun and games that people are freezing their butts off in some places or not. It's a weird circumstance that it looks like that the snow situation in Seattle is worse than in Spokane here, where it's been 35 and my driveway is almost clear, although there's still an awful lot of back snow. Anyway, for those of you who are newcomers to the thing, I've got an ongoing project that's the main core of these shows for many, many weeks, which is why I've got a little Roman numeral attached to everything, which is Analyzing Contested Bones, the book by Christopher Ruppy and Jonathan Sanford, which is an anti-evolutionist, creationist attack on the human evolution matter, and they're trying to be as up-to-date as possible. The problem is trying to figure out whether or not they're actually justified with that by looking at their sources, which I was asked to do. Oh, hi, Brian. Don't call me professor. I'm just a BA in history. I'm not an academic in that respect. I'm just a schlub who knows how to read and is careful. Anyway, the thing about Ruppy and Sanford's bad scholarship is that it's heavily addicted to authority quotes. It's still about 40 some odd % of the book is just authority quoting. And about almost half of the technical citations they bring up, they're bypassing the content of, which is why I like to bring up the sources whenever possible. I'm not deluging people weekly with all the sources that I encounter because a lot of them I'm able to get access to, but if they're not open access generally, you're just talking about an abstract. No, the meat and potatoes of source methods is to be able to see the whole article, to be able to see all the information in it and the context of the authority quoting and other material. And in that respect, you have to be able to see the full text. So the only ones that I put up are full text links to the material that's available. And it doesn't necessarily even need to be a technical source. If somebody is citing a secondary account, and I put up material from Science and Nature and various other ones, where they're not really noticing what's in there, that's a screw up independent of whether or not the source is accurate or not, or whether it's a primary source per se or not. One of the material that I put up, they're in the section on Homo naledi, which is a fascinating bunch. They found this treasure trove in a cave of possibly deliberate burials on the part of naledi, and they're still up in the air about exactly the dating on it because that makes a difference as well. But the fascinating thing is that this is a mixture of some things that are a little bit more like Australopithecines and some things that are a little bit more like in the Homo genus, which is why it's classified as Homo naledi. Nobody's been arguing that point. More importantly, nobody in the systematics field is arguing that they're Homo sapiens in a mutant form. And that's the argument functionally that Ruppy and Sanford are trying to make, is that, no, they're just perfectly normal little humans that have just unusual hands and arms and body and brains and everything else. And if you look at the details, you see what information they're skirting past. So this one is on the hand part. The hand is good for, the naledi's hand is clearly good at grasping arboreally. So it's a habitual biped, but is capable of climbing very nicely, which is implying things about its environment, its habitat, and all the rest. But our little pals don't want that to be the case. They've just got to have Homo naledi over on the human side. So they've been highlighting all of that. And one of the papers that I put a linkage to, which is full text, Brian Richmond, 2007 paper on biomechanics of phalangeal curvature. Ruppy just footnotes and quotes a whole segment of it that's right towards the tail end of it and excises the references about the strain differences between curved and straight phalanges. The problem is the context. And Ruppy claims, quote, Brian Richmond found that finger curvature can occur due to certain habitual behaviors and therefore has nothing to do with genetic changes caused by evolution, unquote. If you can find anything in that paper that suggests that Richmond thinks that the dynamics and variations that we're seeing in these fossils are not due to the genetics and have nothing to do with evolution, then please let me know where, and you all can take a look at it. I also put a paper up that Richmond co-authored from 2016, a book chapter on these very points. And if you can spot an indication that he agrees with the position that Rupi just indicated, that's another one. They're way behind the curve on the data field, and all they're doing is playing parsing games. Puffaluffica says they asked to applaud and thank you profusely for dropping into my Facebook feed, even though my Uncle John is a Seventh-day Tortugan. I don't have any problem being invited in. Anybody that's on Facebook that you want to bring me in for ammo or for commentary and that, feel free to do so. That's what I'm here for. Pick my brain. I'm polite but firm, like Mary Poppins. And I will discuss what the information is. If somebody is getting off the rails, no matter which side it's on, I'll be there to point it out. Idea worth having is one worth defending. And I will put linkages up in discussion of particular source topics. Typically, I don't dive instantly into deluging people on websites. In fact, there are instances where, like at Jerry Coyne's place, he doesn't want you to put pile up of links and stuff in there, as I have discovered. So you can tease material into the case and try to nudge people on to see what curiosity they have about particular topics and all the rest. And at times I won't necessarily know all the material, and so I'll be learning on things or doing further research where I go, oh, that's an interesting question, and investigate more, and then I'm more up to speed, and I will share that. So I get the feeds. Google Chrome is a handy spot for that, because when anybody is commenting on either Facebook or Twitter or on any of the YouTubes that I've done, including this series here, I'll get notifications on it in little sidebars, and then I can triage to decide, oh, I can deal with that later. Or when I get on my AOL email feed, I'll be able to check on Facebook and that there. Or if it's something where, oh, that's interesting, I should probably respond to that right away, I can go ahead and do that. So anyway, feel free to pick my brain on that. And remember that I'm on Twitter. I find that a really useful little platform because I'm able to follow an awful lot of scientists on Twitter. And they basically give me heads up on incoming technical papers that expands the range of the field that I can follow off on. The whole point behind the TIP project is to get a grip on the relevant technical literature that relates to the various points at issue in anti-evolutionism. And the more you can be on the cutting edge, the more you know about the data field generally, and that makes you a better debater and discusser with anti-evolutionists, because you're not flailing around responding to their point. You're going, oh, I know all about that one, and can then just jump in with the direct knowledge on the subject. Somebody somewhere has probably investigated most everything. And the idea behind my tip work here is to act as a conduit and clearinghouse to be able to pull as much of this together so that we all are doing our best game. And indeed, that's something that we have the advantage that we can do today. I mean, I'm an old fart here on a YouTube sitting in my den, and yet I'm able to interconnect with people in disciplines all over the world and deal with technical literature and find the primary source material at the drop of a hat. Although still, I do have to rely upon good old-fashioned libraries at times, because not everything is available online. In fact, I was just tracking down a quote that anti-abortionists have cycled around from an old Time magazine article, which turned out to be a particular caption wording. It relates to Haeckel's embryos and stuff. Came up with Jackson Wheat and I in the chapter we're doing on that in the new Rocks for Their book. But it turns out that the online version didn't have anything of the pictures. So I had to physically go, and it turns out my alma mater, I was going out for their belated Darwin Day thing, and I was able to find that they had the physical hard copy still on their shelves. Yay! And I could then look up that exact thing and confirm what the circumstances were. So it's a mix. If you happen to have college libraries in your area, make use of them. You can use them and draw. You may not be able to check anything out, but you can photocopy stuff and gain access, wander around the stacks and find the information that you need that way. And there will be some journals, very probably, that may not be immediately accessible online, that you still may be able to find hard copy in your university library. So make use of all of that, all the different tools and things that are available. Brian says he sent your tip link to a creationist. He didn't appreciate it, not sure why. Yeah. The lesson that I keep on hammering away at on here is source methods is a game that Tortukans cannot play at all. It's not that they do it badly. It's their brains literally don't think in a source methods approach. They're not looking around to pay attention to all the data field. They're not working out what they think happened, really. They're just scavenging for ammunition to reinforce the cartoon version that they want to be true. And they can't play that source game. 90% of the anti-evolutionists that I'm tracking in my tip data field, which involves some over 3,000, 4,000 some odd people at the moment, involving some 9,000 sources, 90% of those are secondary redactors. They're just copying something that they've read. And so part of the source methods game is to find out, when you're dealing with somebody that's repeating tropes, where are they getting the tropes from? And once you know that, then you can start targeting your responses. Are they coming from ID? Are they drawing from young Earth creationism? In some cases, some things are extremely diagnostic. Certain kinds of authority quotes pop up all the time. The damn Darwin quote on the that pops up in the "Is Darwin racism" thing, that happens all the time. And you get stuff on thermodynamics still. You'll get the one that even Answers in Genesis says don't use, which is why are there still monkeys? Any one of those things can be useful as a way of diagnosing where they're getting their source base from. But don't just diagnose that from afar. Ask them. And you'll find often that the person doesn't actually remember where they're getting their sources from, because they just kind of glommed onto something. They saw it on a video, they read it in a book, or they heard somebody talk about a book. And they don't really know where they get their stuff from, let alone fact check it. And you go to that second part. Where are you getting information from, and how did you verify it was reliable? Ooh, that second part is going to shut them down in jig time. Elisa asks, RJ, what's the difference between intelligent design and young Earth creationism? Methodologically, nothing. But in content, young Earth creationists are, by their very name, defending the notion that the young Earth version of the world, where the entire Earth and universe were made only about 6,000 years ago, and there was a global flood about 4,500 years ago, and that all of the fossil record, for all practical purposes, is a flood deposit. That's a specifically young Earth creationist doctrine. You can find some squishy young Earth creationists that may push the field out a little bit, maybe 10,000 years, maybe even longer, but those are relatively minor ones. You want to find out what young Earth creationists believe? Look at Answers in Genesis, the website. That's quintessential young Earth creationism. That's typical. Intelligent design intersects with it, but very cagely. Technically, it started out back in the late 1990s. Philip Johnson was one of the big movers in that. He was a law professor, a conservative law professor from Berkeley, so he was all grumpy about the liberal environment that he was in. But he was saying that you don't have to believe in young Earth creationism to be critical of Darwinism. But very quickly, the design movement mutated into a different frame, which is that you don't have to give up your young Earth creationism to join us in our attack on Darwinism. So there's been a feedback loop between young Earth creationists and intelligent designers for quite some time. The area that really got fascinated with this was when I discovered that Philip Johnson was partly persuaded to have doubts about human evolution by reading Malcolm Bowden's book on ape men. And Malcolm Bowden is not merely a young Earth creationist. He's a geocentrist. He thinks the Earth doesn't revolve around the sun. The Earth is still stationary. And so you're going, whoa, wait a minute. So you get a lot of this feedback loop going on. And now John Samford, the co-author of this book, has started filtering into some of the intelligent design literature. He's been co-authoring ones that get into intelligent design anthologies, because he doesn't discuss the young Earth creationism dogmas directly. Instead, he's talking about genetics and population biology and stuff that theoretically the intelligent designer can embrace as well. So there's an awful lot of a feedback loop there, and a lot of cravenness, because literally I know of no example where an intelligent designer has publicly directly criticized any young Earth creationist position, even when they don't believe it, like Steve Meyer. I know he's not a young Earth creationist, but he's never written a damn thing about it and has co-authored articles with young Earth creationists on the Cambrian explosion. And, you have to wonder what's going on in his head when he thinks the Cambrian is 500 million years ago and his co-authors think it was 4,500 years ago. Don't you compare notes? Puffalophagus asked, was I correct or incorrect that the Seventh-day Adventists started the YEC movement? Largely correct that Seventh-day Adventism invented flood geology, or rather Ellen White, back in the early 20th century, apparently had a dream where an angel came down or Jesus came down and showed her a widescreen movie of the flood. And she decided that was the case. And Seventh-day Adventism was the one that really got the ball rolling in the 1920s and 30s. George McCready Price was one of their followers and wrote a lot of books that way. And then along comes Henry Morris, who removes the Adventist theology but keeps the creationism. And he's the one that then jumpstarts and produces the more popular creation science movement in the 60s and 70s. And then when you get down to Answers in Genesis, you've got secondary redactor Ken Ham, who forms Answers in Genesis really only in the mid-1990s. So as I just pointed out to somebody on a comment, Robert Byers, who often he's haunted my website, and he's done it in Talk Origins and various others, and he was jumping in I can't remember whether it was Nathan Lentz's one or Joel Duff. But anyway, he was going on about the fossil record and the evolutionary matter, and I had to remind him that he's just not got his data field, and he's never really thought this stuff through, and he's not very good at sources. So he's going to have to document things, and everybody needs to document things. Brian sees Puff is here is on that one in God Did It. Puffalophagus says, yeah, there are actually PhDs that hold the geocentrism position, if I'm not mistaken. I won't go with the PhD part. I can't recall any offhand who, unless they're in outside areas. I mean, there's a geocentrist, Gerardus Boo, who I think he has a mathematics or computer science degree, so he would be a PhD in that level, but nothing relating to geology or anything else. But they are remarkably influential. Geocentrism, as I have put up in postings at TIP, and included a bit on it in 3 macroevolutionary episodes, I think, that geocentrics have been remarkably influential. The guy that actually organized the equal time creationism laws, Ellwanger, back in the 1970s and 80s, was a Catholic geocentrist. And then Tom Willis, who wrote the Kansas Anti-Evolution Standards, air quotes, intelligent design, in the 1990s, is also open to geocentrism. He does not think Earth revolving around the sun is settled science. And you're going, now, needless to say, it's hilarious when young Earth creationists from Ken Ham to Kent Hovind have to grump at geocentrics who are just as devout and just as Bible quotey as they are, and it's just fascinating to watch the headstands they do. They get into the same problem with the extreme group, the flat earthers, who are largely a subset of geocentrism. But whereas flat earthers are largely irrelevant, geocentrics have had an impact. And there's nothing in principle that would prevent some of the young Earth creationists from sliding into the geocentric camp if it was considered the dogma and you had politics pushing it. We know that weird science can get pushed into an awful lot of cases when you have governments that are dogmatically insisting it, and kids get taught it in the schools. This is what happened in the fascist era with the Nazis and Mussolini, and it's what happened in the Soviet Union under Stalin and all the rest with Lysenkoism. The Nazis didn't like Jew physics to their detriment and all that. So this can happen in a lot of areas. The intelligent design movement, in being a big tent, wants to pull everybody together so they can dismantle godless Darwinism, but not really have to take stands on all the fiddly bit details, like whether or not the Grand Canyon was formed in a flood or not. Puffalophagus says his uncle just dumped this insight on my post about 30 million years ago. As with race, the concerns with interbreeding came much later. Remember, if only 2 parents could have trillions of offspring, there probably wasn't even a word for interbreeding. It is a necessity of young Earth creationism that everything stems from 2 bottlenecks, Adam and Eve, and then Noah and the kids. And from that, you've got to have the genetic diversity that we have. Well, in cases of early population, where did Cain's wife come from? A modern creationists pretty much are okay with incest, that they must have had another daughter down the line that they just neglected to mention in Genesis, and that's where Cain's wife came from. And that supposedly the genome of Adam and Eve were so perfect at the Eden times that this was no problem at all. That you'll find apologists from D. James Kennedy and the gang once in a while in Answers in Genesis, basically making that argument because they're forced into it by the theology. It's genetically twaddle. You simply cannot have a viable population that's that small. There's no amount of heterozygosity that you can maintain a population at that low of a level of 2 or 7. And population biology and population genetics are not a forte of anti-evolutionists in general. Brian says, Turtle asks Evolution News, doubts common ancestry, macroevolution, although as I know it is an ID website, so does ID oppose common ancestry? By and large, yeah. There are only a couple. Michael Denton and Michael Behe theoretically accept common descent, but in practice, they don't. And Steve Meyer doesn't accept common descent, and Bill Dembski doesn't accept common descent. The vast majority of that gang do not do that. But they can be kind of waffly cagey. Another one that they will say, Casey Luskin was fond of doing this, is that not all anti-evolutionists are religious. Just almost all of them. Because, again, I can only think Michael Denton is an agnostic, apparently, and Richard Milton is a non-religious person. He's functionally a young Earth creationist. And David Berlinski is kind of an unknown contrarian non-believer. Doesn't like the Big Bang either. And that's it. That exhausts the supplies. That's 3 people. I still have fingers left over on one hand. All the rest are religious, as far as I know. And that would include David Klinghoffer, who was a big apologist for theirs, and Steve Meyer, I know from direct interactions with him. These are not non-religious. So the driving factor on here, on common ancestry, it snags immediately on human evolution. Because for all practical purposes, anti-evolutionists don't like the idea that people evolve from anything. And in the old days, if you look at pre-modern, pre-young Earth creationism, anti-evolutionism, there would be camps who would be okay with evolution up to people. And it would be fine. But by the 1920s on, there was increasing amount of evidence from the fossil record and eventually genetics that was making it impossible to keep human evolution disconnected. And that means that all modern anti-evolutionism, whether it's young Earth creationist or intelligent design, because that's really what bothers them. You even ask people in polls, I don't believe humans evolved from apes. That's the thing that really gets in the craw, not whether trilobites developed back in the Cambrian from a natural form, or whether or not sauropod vertebrae are developing naturally in dinosaurs. They really bother about humans. And it's been impossible to disconnect human evolution from the general evolutionary process. So to be an anti-evolutionist, you've got to dig your heels in and basically deny everything. And they will use trilobites and sauropod vertebrae or anything else as surrogates to get around that. So I hope that answers that little question. The design movement also alleges that they don't identify the designer. But this is disingenuous, because when you talk with them, the vast majority of intelligent design meetings are done through churches or religious colleges. They are superficially non-sectarian, but there's Bible quotes popping up in the thing that Pacific University had, where Jonathan Wells and Axe and Gager came in there, and they were putting Bible stuff up as some of the little references and allusions they would do. Usually at the end of the thing, they're just kind of would have people thinking about the implications of things. But the idea that they're disconnected from that religious angle, and specifically the Judeo-Christian religious angle, you do find their counterparts in Islam who are also kind of dressed up in an intelligent designy mode. They don't deal with the young Earth creationism matter because that's not a heavy part of Islamic chronology. They don't really need to deal with it in quite the same way. I don't know of any major Islamic counterpart to the flood geology gang. So that could change over time, but it's not as big a deal for them as it is for Christians who are really focusing in on the Judeo-Christian Bible. where you got that Genesis story that they really have to defend at all costs. Intelligent designers just don't think about it much, and they don't do systematics. That's another big notable difference functionally between intelligent design and young Earth creationism, is that creationists need to do baraminology because of the ark, but intelligent designers and old Earth creationists don't have to worry about that, so they don't think about it at all. Let's see, we got Don Michaud. Do you know the name of the oldest ape that we have descended from? Oh, wow, gosh, in the primate family, gosh, I'd have to look up the name of it offhand. If Jackson Wheat, who's wasn't available to come in today, he might have ripped it off in there. I can say that the hominid group that we're coming from is a very diverse bunch. And if we're not descended from the Australopithecine, or a particular branch of Australopithecines is one of that bunch. And then their grouping is a larger hominin gradation beyond that. If we're talking about Lisa says H. erectus, oh, they're way far down the road. That's in our genus. That's well past that. If we're talking in this group between us and the gorillas and the chimpanzees and how far back that is, we're talking about a diversification of 10, 12, 15 million years ago. If we're talking about the higher primates and finally down to monkeys, the common ancestor there is going way back, 40, 50 million years. And you're talking about critters that would have looked about the size of a shrew. And you would not go, wow, that's the group that we're coming from. So it depends on where you're looking at in terms of the time frame. And there's an awful lot of new fossils that have been popping along, and I can honestly tell you that I don't keep them plucked into my immediate memory bank on that one. You can see that the two big issues that were related to figuring out what was going on in that, though, is bipedality and big brain. And it looks like the big brain comes later and bipedality comes remarkably early. So that there's a bunch of bipedal primates that are capable of climbing beautifully, but also bipedal either up on the limbs or on the ground. And they're not occasional bipeds the way chimpanzees are. They're just good at it for full-blown bipedality. So the kinds of shifts in the anatomy that for balancing is occurring way before our group gets onto the field with even the Australopithecines, which is about, 4 million years ago, something around in that range. So it's a question that I will have to beg off on to find out what's the latest one that we got. They keep on finding examples going farther and farther back, and I don't have my bibliography up, so I can't go hunting around for some of the technical papers on that one. So there we go on that. Don Michaud says, I'm thinking about 7 million years ago. That's at about the time with the split with the chimpanzees and the orangutans and gorillas. Orangutans are a bit farther back. The chimpanzee and gorilla genomes both are sufficiently close to us that it's been a tough taxonomical bit to differentiate them up until fairly recently. And the latest data that keeps on coming up, and especially when they've included the other bonobos, pretty much is happy with the chimps being our closest relatives. And that's been a split that's going back. That 7 million year date is, after all, twice the range back from the range that we're talking about when we're looking at Australopithecines and Homo habilis and that bunch coming in at 3 million years and so forth. So it's a long ways back. The common ancestor form would look a lot like, more like a chimpanzee than a human. There would have been a lot of upper body strength and of easy arboreality. The irony, of course, temperament, is that the gorillas are relatively even-tempered, but it's the chimpanzees that can get feisty. They can make war upon their others. The main pan species, bonobos, are a different kettle of fish. They're the make love, not war approach to things. The difficulty with a lot of pinning down that zone is because they lived in an environment that was terrible for fossilization. Chimpanzee fossil record is really bad. And it's no coincidence that even our own genus, a lot of the stuff is coming from relatively arid environments where a lot of the pieces get easier for preservation. But you live in a jungle environment or heavily forested, and it disintegrates stuff way too easily. So you don't have much in the way of complete fossils. You'll have a lot of teeth showing up because they're more durable. But the rest of the anatomy gets worn away. And so the chimpanzee fossil record is terrible. I don't think the gorilla fossil record is particularly good. So to the extent that a lot of them were living in a heavily forested environment, you've got the deck stacked against you on the fossil preservation department. Okay. Brian Stevens says, only second question I have seen RJ didn't have the answer for right off. Yeah, even I am not infallible in this. In fact, I'll tell you, the person that I just am gobsmacked at for remembering taxa names is Jackson Wheat. Good gravy, that kid is sharp on that. I can track the material down and remember that, and there's a lot of taxa names I'm familiar with. I'm probably more familiar with a lot of dinosaur taxa from off the top of my hat because my personal interest is way more towards dinosaurs than the early origin of my genus. I go, yeah, we developed from the hominids. Yeah, I live with it. And it's not something that I get all pushed out of shape about, but I have to study it. It's a relatively narrow time frame too. It's something that's kind of although we're amazing and we do hamburgers and rockets and atomic bombs, we're also kind of a minor edge on a branch of the hominids, whereas I'm much more fascinated about groups that dominated such a long time frame, which is why dinosaurs intrigue me, and even down to other groups that managed to muddle along so extremely well. I need to get more information on bacterial forms and all that, but there, Dan, you're dropping off the map. That connects up to the other part of the story, which is the red algae and the chaetandoths, the arrow worms that are the second part of the show. Let me put a pause in here and share the my wonderful patrons here. Since I notice I'm about halfway through the show, and the ritual of sharing screen, because I'm very bad at it. There goes the infinite regress. There we got RJ's tip patrons. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I have definitely discovered that the cash flow is moving from all of you people who have put money in over all this time, but it wasn't getting down to me. And now I knew why once I figured out that there were some menus that we're setting up for like international sales that I didn't do, but that meant that I wasn't actually finishing the process. But anyway, that's all been settled. So I'm a much happier camper, and you will notice I've been much less concerned about fundraising pleas online because I'm actually getting the funds coming to me. So there is Andrew and Hendril and Eric among our colleagues and among our researchers, Keith and Fino and Brad and Ralph and Meet Convert Me and Pelagia, yay Pelagia, and Sur and assistant researchers. We got Direwolf and Duranku and James Fitzwater and brand new Kyle Frick and Nana and Staggles and Surus. I still got to get back on the audiobook recording for Paralogs, and then also doing Evolution Slam Dunk, and Todas Real, and Friends Eat, and Stephen and Marigale and Insects are cool. Hello, Insects! And Daniel Johnson and Bo and Alex and Paul and Zeshi and some legacy patrons who helped in a ways back. So in effect, I'm still acknowledging the stuff that eventually got into my pocket after a long delay. Jen and John and Mona and Son and Everett, every one of you, I appreciate enormously. It's the thing that makes it possible for me to have no stiff decisions between eating and getting ink, or deciding how to scrape up money for fuel, because it's been cold back in here, and I was able to actually refill the furnace with 100 gallons of fuel. That's been helpful because we've been getting down to like 8 degrees at night, and it's nice to keep the house at 60. I really am fond of that. So behold and partake of all of Tip. It's still very much a clumsy work in progress, but there's an awful lot of information that's up there already at tortuganwordpress.com. In many respects, a lot of my focus work has been now on doing the books and the evolution hours. And then, of course, we've got the patreon.com, which I'm now praising everyone for because it's got cash flow coming through. And I still have the GoFundMe.com up, and you can do recurring things through GoFundMe as well. So there's several options that can go on. Some are easier with PayPal and other things. They take a different percentage out of it. Patreon is not as immediate. Their deposits are at the beginning of the month, and GoFundMe is literally a couple days after. So they all have their different focus. But at any rate, I'm enormously grateful to everybody who has plunked down actual real live money for the old fart in Spokane who's a talking head. And that shows that you realize that I'm not just blowing smoke rings, that I'm actually contributing things of use. And I'm very, very thankful for that. So there is the middle of the plug, and we'll get off of that and get back into the delightful little world of actually blathering on the second part. And the second half of the show was related to the intelligent design movement, in fact, and how they keep on spewing out these gotcha kind of posts at Evolution News and Uncommon Descent. Denise O'Leary, I follow on Twitter, so a lot of the stuff I get from there, where she comes up and goes, oh, the red algae existed 300 million years before they thought, ha ha. Well, so what? It turns out that the red algae are tricky little things to deal with. They're a relatively minor group of biologists. They've been hard to classify because they're kind of this and kind of that. The same thing on that arrowworm example. There were aspects about their development that were like protostomes and others like deuterostomes. And so they were always difficult to classify. But the real scientists are doing that work. They're increasingly getting the full genetics and the developmental biology and the cis regulatory chains and all that, and piecing together what was going on, because both of those forms, the chaetygnaths, are probably diverging in the metazoan line back 600-700 million years. You don't have fossils for that. You got to all do it by retroengineering genetics. And I can tell you the intelligent design movement ain't going to do that. Red algae would be going back even farther. And these things are related to potential endosymbiotic events and issues in the origin of plants. And it's a lot of fun old stuff going on in there. But you don't have the direct fossils to deal with. So you're looking at the genetics of the organisms that are billions of years later. And like nothing has happened to them in all that time? No, don't be silly. So it's like a gigantic detective story ferreting around through the detailed biology and looking at the diagnostic genetics, and it takes time to do that. But none of that work, none of it is being done by anti-evolutionists. The anti-evolutionist comes along and they scavenge like Denise O'Leary does. And so I put up the link that she did. I would have liked to put up a full paper on one of the things, but it doesn't hit the open access yet. But I put up the secondary account that you can look at, and you can see even there how she's just skating past the data field. And this has been true of Denise O'Leary all along. She doesn't really respond on Twitter. I'm not really expecting her to, although she hasn't blocked me either. But it is a matter that she's very much a secondary source reader. She reads secondary accounts of technical papers, usually, and not the original paper. Well, you need to read the original. And then the one thing that's totally missing, and if anybody knows of a counterexample, please let me know, is that the anti-evolutionist never explains what they think happened. It's, oh, no Darwinism, or Darwinism is on its last legs, or Darwinism is in trouble. Not what is their model? What is their explanation for arrowworms? When do they think they develop? What would the design event look like with them? How many design events are they? Are they unrelated to anything? Tell us what you think happened. But they don't have a model, so they never deal with it. Puffalovic says, being in Iowa, where your heating situation is close to my heart. Oh, yeah, any place along in there. Oh, Pelagia, hi. Yeah, we're the party people. Yeah, it's I can't complain about the season in here because we've had relatively little snow, although February was the most snow that we've ever had in a February, but it was on top of not having a lot of snow before. So I was able to get out there in the wee hours. I'm a night owl anyway, and it's kind of handy for me to go out. I get nice and bundled up and go out and shovel for 5 or 10 minutes a section, because I got an extremely long driveway that's like 60 feet long, and it's a long and narrow frame. Fortunately, too, I got the Honda Civic, which has got a backup camera, so it makes it a lot easier to get out of things like that. But keeping the house at 60 is reasonably comfortable. The house has good insulation. Quite a few years ago, I put up a brand new roof, and that's been keeping the place good. So there's not been worry about that, no shingle loss or anything like that. And I've got fairly good insulated windows and that. So We're muddling along, and there's places compared to some of these places where these floodings have come in, and people's the tornado that just ripped through Oklahoma, that just vaporized the town. We don't have to worry about that here. And so cold temperatures, but the only thing that can really vex you are ice storms that bring the power lines down, and you can go weeks and months. There was a terrible ice storm. There were people on the South Hill in the city here were going months before they could get the damn thing repaired because it was so difficult to tear out the trees and get up into these little narrow streets and all that. It was anyway. But we're not getting volcanoes here. We're not getting earthquakes. We're not getting tornadoes and hurricanes. A little bit of snow to shovel is a relatively minor inconvenience on that front. My niece was having more trouble over in Seattle because they had a couple feet of snow, and they are not used to snow there. And they have hills up the yin yang, and so it just ground the city to a halt. We are used to it, so we got snow plows and all of that. In the same way, when snow hits Houston, which it did, I think, last year, they don't even have shovels. The stores don't have shovels. Why? There's no snow in Houston. But suddenly they're getting that, and we can expect a lot of this weird stuff from the climate change. And Pelagia, thank you. You are one of our patrons, and now actually I'm getting a little bit of money via that route now, and so I'm absolutely delighted. And you've been good at prodding me to check up on things, and there's still things that I need to do in adjusting my YouTube thing. I need to go through and watch the video to give me a guide to figure out how to rearrange my thing so my channel shows all the channels. There were two different channels that got done up because the thing that set up the YouTube was different than the one that I eventually ended up doing live. And so there's like two different versions of me online between the email addresses, and it's a mess. So I plead old fartism on that and apologize profusely, but at least I'm on every week. And so if you follow me on Twitter, you get the notification just beforehand, and I put the links up to all of that. So I'm winging it from that end. Pelagia, yes, you still use tip regularly. I'm very proud of the material that I've done. I can ask, Pelagia, yeah, good question. When can we expect to see the next published edition of tip PDFs? Yeah, I've got some updates. They're relatively minor details on there, so I haven't been pushed out of shape on it. Had it been the case where I was finally been able to finish the rest of tip 1.7 and 1.8, which would have been on the post Dover trial creationism material, I got a mass of notes that I had to put on the backlog on that. So no, I can't tell you when I would be putting up the updates on it because they're all relatively minor little footnote details in the various tips. The ones that were up, which were from last year and earlier, are functionally the same amount of stuff on it. And maybe I can be kind of bitchy about the fact to get more people to read what's up there already. And of course, there no updates on the old tip material. That stuff, everybody can download those and make use of those. And that, if you view it as a scaffolding for bringing up to speed on the newer material, even I can't keep up with everything focusing in. But what I have been doing on the updates on the little module bits, probably the one that I've updated most that need to be adjusted will be the one on mass extinctions, because I kind of keep track of all the material coming in on that. And there have been a couple new add-ons to the punctuated equilibrium chapter that I added on. But yeah, Pelagia, you're reminding me of my lapses. What I really need to do eventually, and this is the long-term thing, is I know I can't do all this alone. And I will obviously need to have somebody to replace me when I'm dead. And so what I really need is a thing where we can have a team of people who are doing the actual coordinating work for getting all of the old tip material reformatted for a modern website thing. And even there, the technology has advanced so much that I have to think about tip needs to look good on a smartphone or a tablet rather than on a home PC. So the old PDF route and thing was clumsy, but it was the best I could do. So let's see. Alicia says, I hear you, RJ. The more videos I do, the longer my to-do video list. Yeah, I'm very ambivalent. For somebody who's on YouTube, I'm very ambivalent about the videos because you can be inundated. Everybody, if you've got hundreds of different people each doing videos once a week, you have this colossal amount of stuff to deal with. There's a brand new one that Aaron Ra has just done that's 2.5 hours long, where he's debating a creationist. And I bumped into the creationist, so I got it on my little to-do list. My ideal on those is that a lot of those are just seeing what responses are being made as a sociological phenomenon, because it's not usually the case that new information is coming up. The one thing I would recommend is that everybody that does videos, whether they're just discussion videos like this or debate, should do as best you can in making available linkages to your heavy duty ammo, so that everybody watching the show can do their own follow-up, because that's the core source methods approach. And the more you force people to do that, the more it's going to be awkward for the bad researcher to do source methods, because they're going to put up that stupid piece and people are going to be snarking and commenting on, you thought this was good evidence. That this can always work against them. So the let's see what we got here. Funniest AJS has a funny idea. Someone should do a punctuated equilibrium song using the substitutionary locomotion song from Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Yes, yeah, that might be a fun one to come up with. Yeah, substitutionary locomotion. Yeah, I remember that one. And gosh, hard to tell what all stuff we'd want to put in on a punctuated equilibrium song. The one point you definitely want to bring up is how too many people use the term without understanding what it refers to, and they get all pushed out of shape about it, not realizing that it's just a standard part of science now, and has now been applied to areas beyond the speciation issue, which was Gould and Eldridge's original thing. And you will find that even in the unrevised tip 1.3 up there on punctuated equilibrium. It's also a useful heuristic because it brings you right up to speciation issues. That how do you identify what a new species is? How do you determine the rate at which species are forming? And all of that, that's all knee deep in that punctuated equilibrium issue and the paleontology matter that Gould and Eldridge were calling attention to, as well as genetics. So keeping abreast of that as a litmus test issue is a really useful one, because it connects up not only to a lot of actual science issues, but with a lot of twaddle, where if you have somebody who brings up punctuated equilibrium, well, that disproves Darwinism. Oh, really, does it? It's a good talking point. Let's see. Brian says the guy who debated Aaron Ra was just a more boring Kent Hovind. I think his name is McMurtry, if it's the one that I'm thinking about that was just occurring just recently. That was the 2.5 hour one. And I have bumped into him on Twitter. And so because I do kind of like to keep track of the people I interact with on Twitter on that, the fact that Aaron Ra has debated him is helpful. And in case I ever debate him, I kind of want to see what his style is and what sort of material he brings up with and all the rest. I hope to have a reputation where when I debate people, the odds that they will ever debate me again drop precipitously because they debated me. And so far, it doesn't look like Kent Hovind is clamoring to have another debate with me. and Mark Huffman never came back for part 2 of the debate that I did with him on SciStrike's show. So so far, I'm batting good on that one. It's fun. Let's see where I'm at, 547. Anyway, the articles that I put up in relation to the chaetognaths and the red algae are fun on their own merit. And that's the other detail is I don't expect everybody that watches the show to dive into every single link that I put up. You don't need to. But if there's a particular topic where you go, what the hell is that? You can look it up. And then if you go, that's kind of interesting, and read more about it. And because they're typically downloadable material, I try to focus on stuff where you can get, in principle, PDFs. Then you can read it at your leisure and study up on the subject. And every bit of that puts more data blips on your own personal scope. And that connects up to other subject matter. So you may come down the line where you are bumping into somebody that's bringing up a topic that was in one of the technical papers that you had read. And now you know the context of it. You're not being blindsided by it. So it's a no lose situation on there, no matter how many of the works you read or whatever. And there are people out there who will comment on, oh, did you know about this paper or not paper? Often I do know about the paper and I go, thank you very much. I already have that, but often not. I haven't known about that paper, and that means that my data field is now stronger, and it improves the circumstance on things. So it's an ongoing process on here. Dom Shad says, if we came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? That's one of the cute litmus test items that is real handy. You will not find this among higher echelon creationists because they know better than to do that. And so anybody who uses that argument is instantly identifying themselves as a bottom feeder. It's an immediate litmus test because they clearly haven't read Answers in Genesis. So it's warned against using that. They clearly don't know anything about evolutionary systematics because they would realize how a stupid argument that is. Dom Michel, if we came from England, why is there still Australia? It's the same principle as the idea that in just a human family, when you were born, did all of your cousins drop dead? Of course not. So why would you expect the cousins, our primate cousins, to drop dead because our particular lineage developed the way they did? They could just look at it the other way around. You know, if there's monkeys, why are there still people? It's a terrible line of reasoning, and even the professional creationists know it's a terrible line of reasoning, and that's why they don't do it and recommend against using it. But yet, every day, practically, somebody or other is encountering somebody who trots out the monkeys trope, and or they'll either say that or apes or whatever, and it clearly indicates that they're behind the curve. And so you can respond to them by saying, "You don't read much creationism, do you?" And that can throw them off target because now they're saying, "Well, what do you mean?" Well, you just said something that creationists think is a stupid argument. So why are you still using it? Don't you read any creationism? And make use of that argument. Pelosi says, my mom tossed, why are there still baboons at me over Christmas? Oh, dear. Well, you can see how that goes. And that is instantly identifying how far down the food chain she is, Paul, that she is not really familiar with actual anti-evolution literature. She's just got something that she's probably picked up on social media or in somebody doing a trope in a website or perhaps a lecture. But I can't even recall many creationist videos that make use of that argument. Even Kent Hovind doesn't use that argument. He has his own set of twaddle, but that's not one of the tropes that he makes use of. So it's a very diagnostic one to deal with, and always try to catalog. I'm a systematist by nature, so what I'm looking at is to see things that are important litmus test things. On the authority quote front, some authority quotes are more useful diagnostically than others. The gold standard are the ones that aren't real at all. And there's a bunch of them. Oh, the Bonheur quote is one that Bonheur never said. And of course, the Darwin quote is technically correct. That pops up all the time about the apes dying off and the gap between lower and upper. That you need to read it in context. Well, the Darwin quote then is in a different category than the Bonheur one, where the Bonheur one doesn't exist. It's a concoction that's false, and he never actually said that, which means anybody that tosses off one of those is instantly identifying themselves as a bottom feeder quote miner. And you can then probe where they're getting it from, and often they don't know. But if they do have a site, it's going to likely be turned out to be a quote mine. And then you have to wonder, why did they check those out? Quote mines are a fascinating bad practice. And there are people in the secular community that make use of quote mines too, and they're bad to do it as well, where they'll trot out the cute little meme with a particular quote from Carl Sagan or someone, but it's not referenced as to where you can get it. It's just a meme. And I want to wean our side off of that too. That it's by all means put up a quote, but you should be able to jolly well tell where you got it from, and not a secondary quote mine. You should be able to actually have identified the original quote material because it strengthens your argument. You'll know better. You might also read the whole damn thing and find out more about it. You'll read what they were saying before or after and discover, ooh, you didn't know. It's the same reason why having material in a library or having hard copy of a book is so useful. Because if all you're doing is the digitized version and you home in on that little blip, it's not part of a context. Whereas the original material is part of a larger frame. And in the looking at that larger frame, you discover things you weren't looking for. The same reason that why I like to look at the physical copy of a journal that may pop up, because I may discover in flipping through that hard copy to find that particular article, to find that particular information blip, that there was another article in the same journal in that same issue that's, ooh, I didn't know about that one. And you wouldn't have spotted if you didn't do that process. So there's a bunch of little tricks and things that you can do in ways that allow your vision never to be blinkered by the tunnel vision need to look up the particular quote. And that is another part of the source methods lessons that you learn in all areas. Ground things in primary sources, be open to the thing you weren't looking for. There have been way too many times when I've looked up a thing and found that there was way more of interest in that particular issue than the thing I was looking for. And you wouldn't have found it otherwise. So that's all part of the game of figuring out how to figure out what things are actually true. And then, of course, you always want to be working out what you think happened. And the more you can clarify in your own mind such that you can explain it to anybody if they ask you. That's the real litmus test here. It's not that you have to know everything. Remember, I didn't know off the top of my head the name of the currently known common ancestor for the primates, but I can look it up and I can figure out what that general time frame is. And I would suspect, I would be shocked if I had gotten the overall time frame wrong. If I have, then bingo, I'll want to refine that in any future discussion. And so it's a constant ongoing game that goes on in scholarship. And this is not something that exists in isolation. We may be talking about creation and evolution in this particular thing, but these are lessons you do in everything. When you try to make political decisions between candidates, when you're trying to find out whether or not to buy a new refrigerator and what kind is the best one to use. Do you just go by the brochure, or do you find out what the track record is on that, what its reliability is, how expensive is it to repair, any of the little background details? That's source methods. It's exactly the same principle, and you apply it absolutely everywhere. AJS says, I spent decades learning things. I still don't know 1% of everything that there is to be known. In many ways, one of the signs of a useful knowledge is to have a better sense of what you don't know. And I know I have a often very clear sense of the areas that I don't know, and I will need to have to look up about it. And so I'm very careful treading into those areas, like that example of the primate name off the bat. The things I do know, and there are a lot of areas that I have to bone up on. In fact, writing the new rocks book, I'm going to really be diving into physics and a lot of the cosmology issues that I had bumped into a little bit before, but I'm going to have to up the ante on this because I've got to ground it at proper detail level. And so there'll be a lot of stuff to dive into. But that's the things you take on when you take on a project writing a book. Don Michaud says, I wish I knew how much RJ knows. I wish RJ knew how much RJ knows. But I could be accused of being a bit of a polymath in the sense that I'm curious about lots of things. And I'll tell you, the one common thread in them all is that I love history, and I love the sense of, if things are not the same before, how do they get to be the way they are now? And so everything where I can reflect about why automobiles look different, or how did playing cards develop, or what were old movies, and what was the world of the old movie world relative to other things. Whenever I'm doing movie nights and things at my place, or in other people, when we're watching films, I'm placing that film in the context of all the layers of it. Just as an example, if you were to put on Casablanca, the movie itself is made in 1942. We would be watching it in the 21st century. So we would have to think back about what that context was about when it was made in the middle of World War II, where they didn't know whether they were going to win the war or not. And then all the people that were associated with it, the refugees that were showing up in the film that had just fled from France. The lady that sings the Marseillaise had just fled from France. And so the emotion on her face wasn't fake. She was immensely moved by the circumstance of singing that Marseillaise for the movie. And all of that, then the world that existed prior to that would have been in the memories of the people doing that. So you would have to have a sense of the context of how things pull up. Every one of these things can become a learning institution, in addition to the technical things about the cinematographer and the film editors and the music score and all of the other things, and the way production studios were going and how movies were distributed versus the way they are now. All of that is a different world than what you do when you're watching live streaming, even if you're watching Casablanca on a live streaming feed. That's a totally different context. When I'm watching on television, I'm not watching Casablanca the way somebody in 1942 would have seen it, 43 when it came out, where you would have seen it in a movie theater. So there's a totally different dynamic going on in there. And I, as a historian, just naturally to gravitate to all that stuff. AJS, am I strange because I've never seen a single Bogart movie, and yet I love the movie Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid? Oh, dear AJS, let me recommend some. You definitely need to see Casablanca. And for one thing, it's got Ingrid Bergman in it. Wow. And then you need to see The Maltese Falcon. That was kind of his pre-breakout movie. Casablanca cemented him as a star, but the Maltese Falcon kind of put him into the new tier. That was a bunch of minor performers, and John Huston, who was trying to get into the movie thing. He was a screenwriter, and he was going to try to say, okay, let me make a movie. Let me do something that's been done already. And Maltese Falcon was the third remake or second remake of Maltese Falcon, and the only good one. A few others, of course, you got to see Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart in The African Queen. That's one of the great, another John Huston movie. Or for that matter, Humphrey Bogart in the Key Largo, which is just brilliant suspense and about social issues. It's got Edward G. Robinson. It's a taut thriller, and Lauren Bacall, who by that time was his lover. That's a stunner of a movie as well. And one that I was just trotting out for Christmas is just the sweetest little thing. Michael Curtiz directed him in We're No Angels, which is just a delightful little light comedy that's actually kind of a dark comedy as well. And there's it's a very droll, how they managed to slip it past some of the censors, because it involves people getting functionally killed by a poisonous snake, and there's an awful lot of layers to it that it was skirting the production standards. I'm curious to know how they managed to pull it off without that. And it's got a Peter Ustinov performance in it as well. So there's just some of the things that you might want to do to get into the wonderful world of Humphrey Bogart. But Casablanca, you got to see Casablanca. It's a perfect in every way movie. It's just exquisite. It wears extremely well. It's tightly paced. It's only like an hour and 45 minutes long. And it's got Claude Rains in it. It's got a wonderful music score. See it in as good a possible print. You get it on Blu-ray. That's gobsmackingly gorgeous. But at any rate, it's a wonderful movie that is an example, too, of how they were improvising all the way along. People have driven themselves nuts trying to figure out what the set of the cafe looked like, because there isn't a cafe. It's a series of little teeny pieces that they put together to make a cafe, but there's no ground plan. And if you try to make one, nothing fits. You can't figure out where anything is in relation to anything else practically. And then the ending was completely improvised, that they got them stuck as to how they wanted to end the movie. And I won't do a spoiler alert on it. And a tiny detail, you can look for the airplane that's out in the fog. It's a miniature, and there are little midgets dressed up because they didn't have the money to build a full-size thing, and the studio wasn't large enough for this distant shot. So they just built a faked up mock-up of a plane and had little people walking around to make it feel like it was farther away. That's a tiny technical trick that they were doing in the film. Anyway, yeah, Casablanca, damn it. Claude Rains was the invisible man. You could see right through him. Oh, wait, yeah. Claude Rains is one of my favorite character actors. And, of course, he has one of his best performances in Casablanca. One of his last films that you can see him in is Lawrence of Arabia. He has some bits of role in there, and also has some really good lines in that. That was towards the tail end of his career, which would have been about not that far removed, only about 20 some odd years after Casablanca. He never really got to do many leading man roles. He was always the second stringer, and was short as all get out. Did only one Hitchcock movie, although he did an awful lot of episodes. If you catch MeTV and watch a lot of the old 1950s era Alfred Hitchcock Presents shows, It pops up a lot on that. They cycle them a lot on MeTV, and you can look at that. That nice chance to catch up on television from 60 years ago, in addition to all the new Aaron Ra videos to do. It's never ending. You'll never catch up, damn it. Well, I've certainly caught up. I'm past the hour here, and I've digressed like mad on motion pictures and that, but that's another one of my interests. So the mottos of life: stay curious, learn stuff, try to weather the Trumplandia storm and get us into fair weather water in 2021, I hope. And then we can get the future back on track, where we're going to be exploring space, and we're going to be developing new technologies and making life better for people, and trying to avoid global warming by correcting that little problem and going to renewable energy and being clever in the process, and finding out more of what's going on in alien planets that we didn't even know existed until just recently. I mean, this is an exciting time to live in if we don't blow ourselves up with atomic bombs or do something stupid like destroy the climate. We have a lot of things to be optimistic about, and science and reason and fairness and sound scholarly method are always at the ground of it. And everybody that violates those rules must be put to account and held to account, so that it becomes socially unacceptable to be source methods defective. How about that one? Okay. Yes, Brian Stevens, good talk, RJ. Later's all and sundry. Bye, and I will be closing off here, and see you all next week with another old fart in his living room or den here. Stop.